parameter. That could be one of them. Okay, I'm with it. All right. See,
And that's
Jenny on now, and
passion.
Jenny gonna ask somebody else. So y'all better be ready because we went through this like five
Actually,
times.
you got two of us on. My brother is on too.
Oh, what's up, bro? What he got? Nice.
I think he might still be
Hey, how
coming
you
on.
doing?
What's up, man? How you doing, bro?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Hey,
Good, good,
John.
good. What's up,
Always
John?
good. Good to talk to you, man.
Yes, sir. I'm
Hi,
gonna be
Um,
quiet. Go
Jenny.
ahead, Jenny. Take it.
hey, I know Antoine like this. You go. Okay, you guys are doing good. I always like to surprise you guys when I can. So, Antoine, if you allow us just a moment, I'm gonna let
Yeah,
John pop in for a second.
yeah, no doubt. Go
Uh,
ahead.
I used to laugh at my brother because my brother, I've seen my brother write some long test cases before. Um, so, so when you guys have asked how many steps, John, what is your answer? And so if you're new to Road to QA or if you haven't been here for a while, this is my brother John. So you probably seen him in some of the past videos when he pop in. He's still in QA. In fact, he just landed a new QA role, crossing over some nice six figures, might I add. Don't tell nobody. But um I do want to, so let's congratulate him. We didn't announce it too
Yeah,
much.
big
So
congrats.
hashtag
Congratulations.
we still do
Congratulations.
this.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Right.
Yeah.
Hashtag we still do this, right? So, John,
Yeah.
you wrote some really lengthy test cases before. Can you tell us what would you do if a test case started getting too long, and how do you decide that it's too long? What would be your approach?
Um, so honestly, I actually had so on my last role, I had talked to one of our supervisors, who has been in QA for like 20 some years or so. And he recommended, limiting it to around 20 steps, if you can. The reason why I say that is because somebody typically has to follow up behind, a QA analyst after you write the test cases. So in some cases, some companies, like I know my sister on one of her roles, they would actually exchange the test cases and other individuals on the team would run the test cases. And test cases can be very time consuming depending on the amount of steps. So if you break it up, by functionality, by specifically, what it's doing, are there any things that you can take out of the test steps so that it's not, further than 20, further than 20 steps. So I try to keep it around 20. Like if you're forced to go, beyond that, maybe around 30, that's only because the steps really are you have to go through these different pages to do or to tap into this specific functionality. But typically you can break it down, to limit it around like 20 steps or so.
And if you feel like the test case is getting long, do you think the course of action is to kind of analyze and then also review that, maybe go to your scrum
Yeah.
master, your lead, and just say, hey, working on this test case, I'm kind of finding this functionality or
Hmm.
validating it is, coming up to this many steps. Do you have any recommendations? Is this okay? Are you okay with the length of this test case?
Yeah. And that's what I
Um,
did actually, because
okay.
I had a test case that was 60 steps. Okay. And this is when I kind of like first started, in QA. I was like, this don't seem right. This is too many steps. you know. But to be honest, in business logic, when you're talking about like B2C, B2B, like
Mhm.
um, business logic, they have a lot of business rules, they have a lot of, different steps that you have to take to, especially if you work for a company that's like a ADP or, something like that, where they have a million, different ways you gotta, get to certain screens. There are a lot of steps, click this button, it located in this area to get to this form. Once this form populates, pull this test data or enter this test data that qualifies this individual, as a whatever, coverage, you know what I mean? So it's like in some cases it's just inevitable. You have to write out, a lot of test steps, within a test case.
So to answer you guys' question, kind of what John said, but at the same time, if you do feel that something's getting lengthy, you can bring it to your team and get perspectives, and it could be keep going, right? Or
Yeah.
it could be maybe we can break it down. All
Yeah. I
right.
mean,
Be
I've had
okay.
that too.
So be okay
I've had that. Yeah.
with asking the question and using your team, for that clarification. Again, it could depend on company, and how they do things, but if it's actually needed, because in order to prove that functionality, that's what you have to do from an end-to-end perspective. It definitely could be that a test
Mhm.
case is pretty lengthy. So I don't want
Yeah.
to hold up the call, but I also don't want to hold up John. I like for him to pop in, but I do want him to answer one more thing. So John,
Okay.
because I like for students to understand that we are going on technically a few years, right, as QA
Yeah.
engineer. But I will say when you're landing this first one, like you've been a part of your QA role where, you know, you've been there for almost 3 years in your last job. That
Yeah.
was one of
3
your first
years.
roles.
Coming up on 3 years. Yeah.
How is
So
that?
that was my second role.
That was your
Uh,
second role.
yeah.
So how was it? How is it going from? Because I like for them to know that, just like I say all the time, we're still relearning in every role. How do you feel going from what was the system you was actually on, and what is the type of system you're on now? What's the
Okay.
difference?
So yeah, so what I was working on at that time was human capital management. So that's kind of similar to like your ADP applications, like I'm trying to see like the different functionality you have in ADP, like where you're selecting your benefits and stuff like that. That's essentially what my job was. Like we were building out new functionality and modifying and fixing, resolving bugs within that application. So it's essentially ADP in a nutshell. So I'm pretty sure you probably haven't heard of like
Right.
that company name. But at that time the company name was iSolved. And they basically do human capital management. And then I had got a new opportunity working actually within the government. So, the difficult part about going, and I'm not going to say difficult, it's just you got to already be aware of the transition from QA role to QA role,
Mhm.
specifically because in QA, you're always learning. Like in tech in general, you're always learning. But what you're really learning specific to QA is the new application because your last company, like I said, that was capital management. What I'm testing now is not even remotely close to what they do. So like the business process flow is completely different. So the first thing I would recommend is obviously, get into the role, try to understand who all of the key players, like who are all of the, different people on your team, what their responsibilities are. But then the next thing you should be doing from that point moving forward is what is the application? How does it work? Are there any business rules, like special things you got to do to set up, your environment? That way, the more familiar you are with that system, the faster you can be, learning and actually getting into the testing aspects of things. But I would
Awesome.
say the most difficult part about moving from role to role in QA is more or less um, just relearning another system. But that's also the best part, you know.
That is
Um,
not staying the same.
yeah, it's not staying the same. I like to do different things.
Awesome. Was
Yeah.
this okay, you guys, for John to pop in? I know you guys learning with Antoine, and we do this. We kind of do it again. You definitely got calls on test cases. We can finish up. I can let him finish this up. But let us know in the chat. Was this okay? Did you guys enjoy this pop in? Let us know.
Hi,
I know
Jennifer.
that.
If you don't mind, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Please, please,
Abs-
please.
Absolutely.
Thank you. John, or Jennifer, anybody can answer. I'm just thinking in my head. So you know how because he said something about having a lot of test cases, you can have 60. And as Jennifer, I saw your eyes popped up. So is it possible to have so if, for example, this is just assumption, if we have like 30, 40, 60 text cases, can it be for one story? You know how we can have story, and when a story gets too big, we drop it down to epic, but if we have test cases that are a lot, 30, 40, we can do that for one story, or do we have to break down to something else? How does that
Okay.
work?
So all right. So what I was walking through, and Jenny, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think originally, like when I was answering the question, if I'm not mistaken, it was more or less around how many steps you can have within a test case. What you're referring to is how many test
Okay.
cases can you
Okay.
have? Yeah, how many test cases can you have per like story? So essentially,
Oh,
what
yeah.
you go through, what
Yeah.
you go through in QA is called the estimations and like the planning, right? Typically from a QA perspective, with your past, with your supervisor and maybe a lead or whatnot, your team goes through how big is this item, session, based on the like general knowledge of like the specific item that you're testing. So they'll say,
Oh,
based
hold
upon
on.
what we know this
Where your
functionality is.
audio go? Can y'all hear him? I can't hear him.
Yes, I
Oh,
can hear him.
Oh,
oh, okay.
okay.
Oh, okay. I thought I got it. Okay. So
Oh, I
yeah.
don't know what happened. Okay.
Yeah. So from that perspective, so your team as a whole go through estimations and grooming, and they will actually know if it needs to be broken out to where you don't have so many test cases for it. So it's all based around like time. It's mostly like project management to a degree from a QA perspective. So if it does get to a certain point, the best thing for you to do is to, again, at that point, reach out to your business analyst if you have some, or your lead, and say, hey, look, I'm going on this many test cases. We have this much time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the priority items first, specifically the areas that are most important, because in testing, what you'll learn is there's no such thing as exhaustive testing, which means you cannot hit every validation point. I mean, you're going to hit all the validation points, but you can't test every single thing, because there's always going to be something that needs to be resolved. There's always going to be a bug that occurs in the system, right? So you're not going to find every bug, in testers in the field will tell you that you can't find all bugs.
Okay,
Antwan,
thank
said
you. I
something?
think you even actually answered me. You can have as much test steps. Yes, I got you. I think I
Yeah.
understand that point. Yes, thank you.
Yep.
John, if I can ask a question as well.
Mhm.
Did you, I think it was one of the deep dives where you said something like, always refer back to the acceptance criteria, because
Yes.
that sometimes we go outside of that and that's what causes extra steps. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes we can, like, if you're focused, like I will be honest, in testing, you can easily do scope creep, which is you have your in scope, for that item, and then you have your out of scope. So what should you not be testing? And it's very important to know, okay, you're focused on this and not all of these other things that tie into that. The whole point is that it may
We
have,
actually need to, I
Yeah.
love that point. I'm gonna let you go ahead. Yeah, we need to
yeah.
make sure
So it's more or less
time
like
out.
in scope, out of scope. What's in scope is what's based on what's in that acceptance criteria. That's your in scope. Out of scope is anything that's outside of it. Now, asking clarifying questions related to the item, like the acceptance criteria, maybe you have to reach out to the BA. That's acceptable, so that you don't do that scope creep.
I was a kid for 30 years. Swimming?
But I've honestly had situations where I went outside of, the scope, and I had to, ask clarifying questions for it.
So it just helps us narrow it down.
It's
Yeah. So the acceptance criteria is what you're supposed to be validating. So you want to focus on the acceptance criteria and what you're testing.
Let's give an example. So like if you was on a user story for e-commerce site and you had to validate the order account page or something like that, but you had to log in or something like that. I'm trying to think of something fast.
Yeah,
but
like you wouldn't. So like if the
maybe
focus is to log
Right.
in, right? Like if the focus is to log in, and to validate that, if you enter valid data on the login screen, or you enter negative data on the on the login screen, you're not supposed to be testing what happens after that page, right? So as long as you get a success, hey, you're logged in. Now you should be validating that you get to a specific page after you log in, right? But you should not be validating other functionality outside of like that login page. And sometimes, testers can go outside of the acceptance criteria and say, well, after I did this is what happened, and this is what happened. Is like, that's not the focus of that test. That's not the focus of that acceptance criteria. The focus of the acceptance criteria is when you sign in, when you enter valid credentials or invalid credentials, what does the AC say should happen? And that's what you should be focused on.
I have a
Like, you're
question,
not going to
John.
come in as a QA and know the whole software, right? The whole point of Agile is to, or Agile, however people, Scrum, Agile, Scrum, is to do things in small components. So you're going to learn as you go, but yeah.
So, for clarification, right? So if I'm on Amazon and I'm just testing that I can place an order, I
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be adding go to Amazon.com necessarily, put in the login credentials just to try to keep it short. Just stay on the fact that I'm assuming we're in the account and we're picking the item, adding it to the cart, and walking through ordering.
Prime example, that's your preconditions. So you can put in your test case preconditions. You're logged into Amazon's website with a valid Amazon account credentials, and you're going to navigate to that page, right?
Sure.
So that way you don't have to go through, because it's assumed you're already on the page so that you can test that. Yeah. And
Okay.
that will also limit steps too. You may have some preconditions that eliminate, steps too.
Mhm.
And
So if you
then
have
some,
different like account types or something like that you need to log into, you don't have to, put all of that. It just kind of depends on the circumstance or the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
and
Mhm.
so when you're also using a test management tool, you can also use those, like some test management tools actually allow you to save steps. So you don't have to keep typing them out. So like you said, it's two ways. Like in our internship, I have you practice it where you're doing it from the beginning all the time, because we want to assume that the user knows
Yeah.
nothing. So but that, like he said, you can write it from that perspective and say that in an interview, right? So that you can articulate that you understand it, it can be done those ways. But
Mhm.
in a test management tool, to save you time, you can have saved steps, so you don't have to also keep writing them, or like he said, have them as a precondition that it's assumed that they have an account already, or is
Yeah.
someone that doesn't have an account.
Yeah, and that will eliminate steps as well too. So that's another way, from the earlier question, how do you eliminate steps? If you have a specific account type, right? It's assumed that you're logging in with this account type with these credentials. That's your precondition. So yeah.
Awesome. I think Antoine has something. Then we can go to Kareem. Antoine, I think if y'all okay, I
No,
think
we good. Hey,
we gonna
this,
chill this out for the rest, and then he could pick
uh,
back up. But y'all, are y'all liking this? Is this okay?
yeah, I think they're getting some good gems right now. Concerning test cases, I do have one question, John, Jenny. So I just want to, because nobody may have, thought about this question before. So my QA today. And I just want to get your input. So we're in the time crunch with testing, right? And testing test cases. So she hadn't created test cases for her AC. But if you're ever in a time crunch and you haven't really gotten all your test cases done to verify a particular feature, is it okay for your QA to go ahead and execute test cases based off of, I'm saying, domain knowledge and go back and do test cases and do the test cases, or would you kind of slap on the hand, don't do that?
Um, so me personally,
If you're in a time crunch,
time
if you're in a time
crunch. Yeah, I was
crunch.
about to say time crunch and QA is it can happen. It will happen. I'm not even gonna say it can happen. It will happen, right? Um, I would say you have to have your test cases written, because what are you testing? Because that's your documentation.
Good.
Without documentation, how do you say, how do people say it? Without documentation there's representation, something like that. But yeah, like without the documentation, you can't you shouldn't be testing essentially, because if somebody, let's say for instance, somebody says they executed something, right? There's no proof that you executed it. Therefore, they can say it wasn't tested.
Hmm.
Or what if they
And
changed
that,
the business requirements and it wasn't documented somewhere?
yes,
So now you're going based upon the domain knowledge or the initial know-how of the
yeah,
functionality, but they actually made changes. So now a defect gets out because we assume that we knew what should actually happen, and we're not validating against the actual business requirements, and we haven't written test cases out to make sure that everyone, because like what if John is out? What if John was out when they actually made those updates and we all had the same domain knowledge, but then we came back and we said, okay, we're in a time crunch, just go ahead and from what you know. But now a defect gets out because guess what? John wasn't there and he wasn't on that meeting where they actually changed.
yeah,
Um, so I would agree with John that for me, like we need to find the order of priority of what we're going to
yes,
do, let the stakeholders and our team know what we believe we can get done. And
Transparency.
at that time, we're going to have to recalibrate to see, like, is this something that we can actually get done? I mean, are we going to stay overtime? How many team members do we
Mhm.
actually have? Do we
right,
need to push something to another sprint? That's how I would approach that.
Y'all
yeah,
getting the
and
gems.
yeah, and that's exactly what happens in our sprint. And honestly, if you work for a pretty good company, as long as it's not, I mean, like most items are typically committed, right? Meaning like that they promised the client that they would get it done. But there are like you have high priorities and low priorities. So they're always going to give you the high priorities first. So your focus is always going to be on, okay, these are the 3 items that must go. So my focus and energy is going to these regardless. I care about the low priority ones, but this is what I'm focused on right here, specifically because that's what the job, that's what the client wants, and you're in that company that you work for, especially if they're like providing services for QA. That is most important, to get those high priorities out. But yeah, I say you have to have test cases. If you don't have test cases, you're actually hurting yourself, because at that point, respectfully, your job would be on the line,
Mhm.
like as a QA, you put your job at stake.
Thank you for the answer. I told her, I said, nah, you have to do that test case.
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
nah, I said, no,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
not do that.
Because
Nah.
Right.
nobody can cover for that individual.
Yeah.
You know, you
Right.
can't
And
you couldn't even go behind her and say, yeah, well, I looked at it, and because then they'll be, all right, well, if you looked at it, then why didn't you tell us to do a test case?
right. And then you're
So,
the scrum master overseeing the QA. So now they're gonna come to you and be like, well, you let this pass through all these different validation points. And so now your job is on the line because at this point we're not
right,
ensuring a quality product.
Gotcha.
exactly. Yep. Test cases come first.
All
Yep.
right.
Yeah,
All
y'all
right.
went crazy on that one.
Huh?
Y'all went crazy on that one.
It got personal.
Yeah. Well, I personally have to take it seriously because, for me, a lot of people look at like certain roles as just jobs. For me, this is a career. This is also my livelihood, right? So I want to be the best I can be at this so that I can expand to other areas eventually. So, I want to give the best advice possible so that, as you all are learning, you all know, hey, you're not just learning from somebody who, yeah, this is just a job, right? Like, no,
This is just to break you in. This is just to break you in tech real quick.
yeah, this is something that this is something that you're really trying to do, to expand your skills. The most important thing you can have in this world is knowledge, and you're learning. So,
You
yeah.
guys, Antoine's going to jump off. You guys thank Antoine. I know we took over a little bit more, but we like to try to pop in and give Antoine some support. So I'll have him pick back up next week, and I'll go ahead and get ready to close this out with my brother. But
Thank
I
you.
hope you guys, Antoine, have a great night.
Antoine,
Take
thanks
care
a
of
lot
your
for the
car.
time.
Thank you,
Y'all have a good
It's
one.
always a
Take it
pleasure
easy.
for John and to see Antoine too, because
Thank
Antoine, we're
you.
gonna tell y'all, if y'all don't know again, Antoine was here in the beginning. And when
Yeah.
I first launched Road to QA ebook and master classes, so he was here with us when we first got our first QA jobs, and he ain't know us from nothing. He just bought my little ebook, and so it's always cool for us to jump on, and then he can get to speak to my brother because
I'm
he's my
family
brother.
now. I'm
Right,
Oh
he
family
man, he
now.
family now.
always,
Hey,
Family
man,
now.
family
Antoine's
now.
always grilling me, man. But I enjoy the questions because I know the questions you ask the team is that, the individuals in the course is asking, and that's great. So thank you as always, man.
You're welcome. Y'all have a good night. Appreciate y'all.
All right, have
Yes,
a good
sir.
night. I'm going to go ahead, you guys, and we're going to wrap up.
Thanks,
Y'all ready for
Antoine.